The president made the long-awaited announcement in the White House Rose Garden this afternoon, and it did not at all come as a surprise. It was, after all, one of his key campaign promises. However, Mr. Trump did seem to leave some wiggle room for finding a way to stay in the accord.
So we're getting out, but we will start to negotiate on terms that are fair to the United States, its businesses, its workers, its people, its taxpayers.
For now, the president went on to announce the U.S. will stop its implementation of the accord as of today. But is a renegotiation of the agreement probable or even possible, as the president suggested? Well, joining us tonight to give us their thoughts and reactions are Karen Weigert, a senior fellow at the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. She previously served as the chief sustainability officer for the city of Chicago. And Steve Gorham, a policy advisor to the Heartland Institute. That's a conservative and libertarian-leaning public policy think tank. Thank you both for being here tonight. Karen Weigert, your reaction to the president's announcement?
Well, as you said, I don't think it came as a surprise. I think it was consistent with where he had been as a candidate. What it is, though, is utterly inconsistent with his pledge to protect Americans and to strengthen our communities. And I think that's the real challenge going forward, is when we look at what are the international security ramifications of a reduced U.S. presence and, in fact, long-term heightened climate change, and what are the economic threats when we think about the impacts that can happen here and our loss of leadership and opportunity in growing economies in the clean energy space. All
right, you mentioned a lot there. I hope to get to most of those in just a second. But Steve, your thoughts on what the president did today?
Well, the president's a practical guy. The Paris Agreement is a voluntary agreement, but it does have ramifications for the United States, particularly if we stay in the agreement. But I'm sure his advisors have told him that there are 2,400 coal-fired power plants in planning or being built around the world, more than 1,100 in China, almost 500 in India. And so the rest of the world is building coal-fired power plants. At the same time, in the United States, we've reduced greenhouse gas emissions by about 12% since 2006 because of the hydrofracturing revolution and the shift to natural gas. And all that was done through the free market. So the president is trying to reduce energy costs and reduce restrictions on the United States that are coming from international agreements.
Well, Karen Weigert, what about that? Because the president did cite China and India as saying they are not bearing the brunt of this as the United States is, both in terms of what they can do with, for example, coal-fired plants and in emission reductions.
It's a really interesting scenario because the Paris Agreement is structured so that each country determined its own goals. So the U.S. determined its own goals, China did the same, India did the same. And it's a very interesting and in some cases unprecedented international agreement because of that. We were able to set the terms under which the U.S. entered. China and India did the same. Now what's important is this is the first time that we've had all countries, all but two, participating in one structure. It provides the flexibilities for countries to determine their own goals, so we can continue to think about the actual things that will strengthen our economy and reduce our emissions. And China and India are in that same story. So it's structured as a good deal, and that's part of why you've seen so many CEOs support staying in there. This is a deal they can work with. It has sight lines and it has a pathway forward, but it also has flexibility to be practical.
Steve Gorham, at the heart of the deal is carbon dioxide emissions. Do you believe that that is what should be targeted principally when it comes to any talk of climate change?
Well, it is, but I would submit there are larger environmental issues that we need to work on. For example, 80% of the world's wastewater is discharged today into rivers, lakes, and oceans untreated. That does not happen in the United States and Europe, but it does happen all over the world. That is a problem that needs to be solved. The idea that we're going to stop the planet from warming, even as the president pointed out today, the Paris Accords would only affect global temperatures by about 0.2 of a degree Celsius by the year 2100.
So do you not believe that carbon dioxide emissions are at the heart of climate change if you believe in it?
No, I believe the evidence shows that climate change is dominated by natural factors. People make the meaningless statement all the time that the climate is changing and humans contribute. Well, that's really meaningless. Climate has been changing for all of history, and as I like to say, my 12-pound dog contributes. The real question is, what is the size of the contribution? More and more evidence is showing that natural factors dominate Earth's warming and cooling.
Karen Weigert, was the United States already feeling the effects of this agreement, as the president said, that it was costing the country a fortune in terms of jobs, job creation, and business growth?
No, and in fact, I think the opposite is how we should think about it. One thing is what are costs and one thing is what are benefits. And we were very early in terms of the structure of this deal. I mean, it was just signed in 2015 and then went into force less than a year later. What we were looking at, though, is what are those economic pathways? So there were policies that were in place to think about how can we have efficient electricity production? How can we have vehicles that save residents money when they drive them because they use less energy? Those are the kinds of things that were in place to help think through the actual implementation. But more broadly, we're also seeing a changing climate. We're seeing weather patterns that we've never seen before. And I think when you look at...
do you believe carbon dioxide emissions are the primary cause, unlike what Steve Gorham believes?
I do, and I take that really from the consensus in the scientific community on that. And I think when I sat in the mayor's office, we would look at these weather events, and they just weren't consistent with what the patterns should have been. We were seeing 10-year storms every couple of years, and that's just not how the math should work.
Steve Gorham, so what do you believe the ramifications are going to be from this? Because some European countries are already threatening a CO2 tax on exports from the United States, and Karen Weigert believes that it diminishes the leadership role of the United States by withdrawing from this
Well, I think the impacts are primarily political. The President has taken a great deal of courage to step out in leadership away from all the other nations of the world. He's made Rex Tillerson's job as Secretary of State very much more difficult. He's made Scott Pruitt's job easier.
Rex Tillerson was among those that urged him not to withdraw.
Correct. I think he's made Scott Pruitt's job, the head of the EPA, easier because one of the main arguments against relaxing other environmental carbon dioxide policies would have been that we're in the Paris Climate Agreement. So there's big political implications on both sides of this decision.
What about this carbon dioxide tax that some are threatening? Some foreign countries are threatening
that has been in the past. Countries have said, well, we'll put a import tax on goods. Again, the United States has reduced, pick a nation, we've reduced our CO2 emissions more than France, Germany, England, China, India in the last 12 years because of the free market and development of natural gas energy sources. So it seems to be a little bit tough argument to make.
Karen Weigert, do you agree with that?
One thing that's interesting is, yes, the U.S. has reduced emissions. It's starting to show that you can grow your economy and not grow your emissions. That's exactly the future we're all looking for. And this example of natural gas and hydraulic fracturing being behind a portion of it, that's absolutely true. And a lot of the original funding for that kind of energy innovation came through the Department of Energy. That's the kind of funding that the President is talking about cutting off now. It's cutting off that future innovation and America's leadership in those markets.
We have 30 seconds, so 15 for each of you. What do you believe is going to happen post this announcement today?
Well, I think you're going to see leadership stepping up from cities, states, and companies. Those are the three sectors that really will become the proxy U.S. And I think we're going to see, unfortunately, other nations take the lead in markets that we helped create and in shaping a world that we'd like to see.
Steve Gorham, what is your prediction?
I think that this might be the beginning of the end of climatism, if you will. I think other nations like Russia and Australia may rethink their position. The climate models have clearly over-forecasted temperatures over the last few years, and many scientists are now predicting we're in for 20 or 30 years of global cooling.
Karen Weigert and Steve Gorham, thank you very much for being here tonight.